How about, for example, you have visited South Africa while making this film, and how about the situation right now? Because I have heard that still the communities are not so very well
well, of course not, but
close together in the sense that they have been integrated into
we
each
still
other.
have problems in the United States of America, and we ended slavery when? A long time ago. These things take a long time, and the biggest problem in South Africa is economic. I mean, it's really a country where it's a first world, third world country right together. Mm-hmm. And that nobody has moved economically in a way that has really been helping the poor people in South Africa. And what's gone on since then is a situation where a number of, and many of these people were the leaders of the liberation movements, because what they did is that when the corporations were coming back, the ANC made a lot of deals with international corporations, and part of it was to also force them to have black people on their boards if they were going to operate there. So who gets to be on their boards? Well, the high up ones, and many of them are multimillionaires now. I mean, it was funny when I was showing my series, Work in Progress, in South Africa to various people and to students. In this one school, everybody wanted me to make a film about where they are now. I said, no, you make that film, it's not film for me to make. So that's a problem. And then along with that, they had kind of a political push, which they call black empowerment. And it's basically, it's only serviced, what the change is that now there's a wealthy black class of people in South Africa. Okay, and what's not changed is for the majority of the poor, things haven't changed enough. And but let me tell you, the hardest thing to do is not to throw out a tyrant. The hardest thing is to build an equitable society after that. It's much harder than getting rid of a terrible system. So I tell people a couple of things. It's that it's only been 15 years. That's not very much time. And in the film I made about Mississippi, that you saw, yep. Bob Moses, who is one of the leaders, this is a film about the civil rights movement in Mississippi, and I asked him what really changed about Mississippi and what they did, and he said, well, all they really did was bring Mississippi up to the level of the rest of the country. They just got rid of these, in essence, apartheid laws, really. And the right to vote. People had the right to vote. It never solved the problems of people in Mississippi, and that still exists today. So that's all that happened in South Africa. They just got rid of apartheid, on the books. But it's going to take them a very long time. And from my perspective, the problems that they face, the whole world faces. I mean, we have a much more unequal society in America than we've had in a really long time. And we have a lot of poverty in our own country. The poverty is a world issue. It's not just South Africa's problem. So, I guess I have a little bit more patience about it, though I think that there's a lot more struggle going on. I hope it doesn't get too dangerous, because I don't think, people don't follow it, but there's the Youth League and the ANC, and the guy that's head of that is, I think, potentially dangerous. But we'll see. But I think it takes a lot to try to make your society be, fair and economically equal.
And
I don't think
we don't know whether it's possible.
Yeah, nobody's quite.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask one more question, and it's more touching the subject of freedom on my mind. That when I see your work, I see that you are so into the details, and you work with many kinds of archive material. You speak with many people, and I was curious. How it starts. I mean, how you start your work when you, for example, you see the subject that you want to speak about or to make a film about, and how you start seeking for those small bits and pieces to get them together and make the film.
You mean, how do I get the archives?
No, not how but I mean, what is your starting point? What is the first thing you are doing?
Well, I think the first thing I do is try to figure out what the core center of the dynamic I'm exploring and what I'm exploring. Okay, and where the conflict is. Okay, like in the Mississippi film, you could make many films in many different ways, and you could have made a film about the conflict between the African Americans in Mississippi and the white people of Mississippi. I chose not to make that film. I chose to make a film of the conflict between the movement in Mississippi and the federal government. Okay, there was a different story that I wanted to tell. And I also wanted to tell a story I didn't get to tell because it made too long a film. It's, you know, films have their own life, and at sort of some point, we ended up with like 3 films with that film because I wanted it from different people's points of view.
Or with 7 films.
Yeah, and to show people that, because what's historically important in America is that, you know, a lot of people, when you look at that era, the 60s and the 70s, and I don't know how much of you know anything about America during that time. Do you know what the 60s mean in America?
Segregation and...
yeah, it was a big fight against segregation, and we were fighting the war in Vietnam, and we started the women's movement that also spread all over the world. We did all of these things and started liberation for gay people, of which your people here are making films about, for Latvia. And it was an incredible sort of time during that time. And in this summer of '64, when they were fighting for the rights of the blacks in Mississippi and blacks everywhere, they didn't have the right to vote in Mississippi. They couldn't vote. So they brought down white students to be part of their campaign, because with the white students, the whole eyes of the nation would come down. That's how it worked. And these students, many of them singly became leaders of big movements for the rest of the decade. It all kind of started here and with that. So there was a lot of things I wanted to show that many remained on the cutting room floor. It's true on this one, but we added 35 other scenes to our DVDs as extras, over 4 hours. And this thing is 8.5 hours long. So we didn't have to leave it on the floor, we could put it onto our DVDs, which is a little bit more satisfying because you cut all these things and you lose people you think are great and they can't be in the movie. So, you know, the digital age, I think, is a great age for being able to make films now. It's much easier and much more accessible. But I start with concepts, you know, and so that's going to tell me how to weave a story, okay? And I did the same thing with this. The concept of this one was about the interrelationship of the struggle inside South Africa and to those outside, which meant it limited what I covered. I only covered events inside South Africa as they affected what the rest of the world did. I only covered things outside South Africa as they really impacted what happened in South Africa. So it allowed me to weave through stuff and say, okay, I'm not going to deal with you, or you, or you. Because otherwise you just get overwhelmed. So you have to have something that guides you through a story. You know, so is that what you're asking?
Almost, yeah. I mean, it's. I meant maybe that I understand the concept thing, but because for me it's a really thorough job that has been done. I mean that's it's not just a film; it's a research, and it's a huge research, and that's why I'm always surprised when I see something like this, and then I feel that how you start something like this. It's not and maybe you gave us a small clue about it, but still maybe there are.
Well, I would say like the first film I ever made was like that. Okay, so that's the first thing I ever did. I made a film that was original research because the scholars hadn't gotten to it, and it was about what happened during women in World War II, and how they got pulled into all these industries that they weren't supposed to work in because they were women, and how they got kicked out when the war was over, and how they got all these films made in the 50s saying, oh, you must make babies, and all these other things you have to do. So, and that runs counter to the films made in the 40s saying, oh, please, women, you have to come work here. So It was, and it was original research, but and the civil rights story was not so difficult to do. I mean, that was something that was not original research, and this was, though, and believe me, I would never do this again. If I knew now, when I started, I would have never done it. Never. This has been extremely difficult, and it's also because you have to, it's done in what I guess people today consider an old style of filmmaking, and what I was told at your film school with talking heads, bad. But anyway, I don't know.
Now they are coming back into the fashion. So.
Well, that's good. That's not what the kids do. But anyway, it actually, I had to spend so much time figuring out the story. I could never say, oh, I'm going to experiment with a new way to do this or that or that. So it was, and it was enormously difficult to structure, which I can talk with you afterwards about. That was extremely difficult to do. But anybody have any questions or thoughts? Or, yeah?
Did you write the script for this film or someone else?
I don't write scripts. A script wasn't written. The film gets made in the editing room, and I work with the editors, and we make the story. I don't work with, so that's how. And I will hire some writers to finesse the narration. There isn't very much. I usually don't try to work with much narration, but sometimes you need a little bit. And we do the first writing, and then maybe someone comes in and kind of polishes it throughout the whole series. But it gets written in the editing room. There isn't a script. And the way I work is that I lay out the story first in what I call paper cuts. I mean, and that's the audio component of the story. We transcribe all our interviews, we transcribe all of our archival footage, and I make a story, you know, I call it a paper cut. And then that's the first thing that the editor works with, and we put that together, and then we start working with it from that, but that's how it gets done.
Now you can see from this huge work that is inside the film that you have done, and I think it's almost impossible to comprehend this one, and then if I have to realize that there are 7 of those films, and every one of those is made with such a, I think, perfection. Yeah, you can call it perfection. Yeah. It was really good to see it.
Yeah, people work different ways, but it's basically, I have to get scripts written to get funding from one of the organizations that funded this film, which is the National Endowment for Humanities, which is a U.S. government organization. We have 2 endowments that the government set up. One is the humanities, one of the arts, and I got funding from both. And the humanities is sort of set up to bring, you know, humanities issues like histories and scholars together with people who can then make something that gets more out to the public. That's sort of its reason for being there. So I have a lot of scholastic advisors on this, but this film, it was difficult because the people only knew their little area. I mean, nobody had really written a thing about the whole thing. And so my key advisor was actually this guy at the United Nations who worked for the UN, had a special committee on apartheid. And so he was my best source because he's the one who really knew everything, and nobody else kind of did. And but they were helpful in certain areas. So I had to write scripts before I'd done stuff, and to get them to funding. And so they funded part of the film, so I had to write 2 scripts for 2 parts of it for them, but that was literally to get funding. And I was hoping we could then use it to edit well with, but it just never works that way.